The world's not interested in that. But it's the most significant event in the last almost 2,000 years. I see a little connection there between black history and Jesus. Because God did say that he was going to bring them back to Israel, back to the promised land, and they are there. And they've been there for the last 60, 61 years. So, let's take a look at how all of this came about. Because if you know how to read biblical history, it lines up with world history, East and West. The history of the Eastern and Western civilization tell you what happened. But the Bible tells you why and how. And you can go down to any library and get a history book to tell you what happened. But it takes some divine inspiration and insight to figure out why it happened and to be able to pinpoint it and discuss it and explain it. So, let's take a look. Where shall we start? Let's start by putting black history in perspective by looking beyond the African experience. The African experience in the life of African Americans for almost 340 years is just a middle passage of life in God's scale of eternity. It's nothing but a whisper, a vapor. So we can say with some biblical assurance that the middle passage of one's life does not establish one's heritage. The heritage of African Americans is not predicated upon the American slave experience. That's a mindset. But upon our existence, upon the existence that preceded it. And I'm not talking about back to Africa. I'm talking about back beyond Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Back to the time when one family, 4 men and 4 women, there were no Steves and Steves. There were no same-sex marriages on that ark. Because same-sex marriage cannot fulfill the requirement of God for our existence. Procreation. Yeah, you can adopt. We're talking about procreation. The egg and the sperm. So, where can we begin to make this correlation, this connection between God's prophetic word concerning the Christ and Dr. Bunch's fulfillment of God's prophecy. And he happened to be an African American. How can we do that? Let me have a word for the African American community. As I see the Black History programs and celebrations, Black History Month is not doing enough to motivate a heartfelt change in the self-esteem and the estimate of self-worth by African Americans. All them stars being paraded out, what have you, during Black History Month. They don't build no self-esteem. Yeah. I know some of them pull themselves up by the bootstrap that someone else was holding. Now we call that person a mentor. And we praise God for providing mentors from the descendants of Shem and Japheth, and some of Ham. During Black History Month, African Americans will be reflecting upon their culture out of their African ancestry and experience in Western civilization. That's all. That's what we know. African experience and our experience in Western civilization. A period of slavery, then a period of trials and tribulations, and then an easing of the tension. But it's not enough, because 340 years of your history, you don't want to dwell on it. The slave experience is not a pleasant experience. In order to achieve the goal of increased self-esteem and estimate of self-worth, consideration should be given to including not only the culture out of the African experience, but also the heritage and legacy of our ancient black ancestors before slavery. And I'm not talking about great kings and queens of Africa. I'm talking about how God used the descendants of Ham in his eternal plan. The ancient African experience should be integrated with the African American experience to provide a broader knowledge of our contribution to world civilizations. The cradle of knowledge. The cradle of knowledge.